All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I'm super excited to welcome you to what is going to be a fabulous episode. We have Hilary DeCesare with us today. Welcome, Hilary.
Hey, Heather, good to be here.
So good to see you. We've been joking that it's taken us a little while to get this scheduled. And then, of course, soon as we try to hit record, we're having technical difficulties. So, you know, all the
But
things.
fingers crossed, it's going to work out and we're going to be able to deliver a good show to your audience.
That's right. I think we will. For those of you that don't know Hilary DeCesare is an award-winning business expert, esteemed author, host of the Relaunch podcast, and Radio America's The Relaunch Live as, let's see. Oh, let me try that over. Hilary DeCesare is an award-winning business expert, esteemed author, host of the Relaunch podcast and Radio America's The Relaunch Live. As a sought-after speaker, founder of the Relaunch Co., and creator of the Fired Up Entrepreneur signature course, Hilary brings fresh energy to industry leaders, CEOs, and solopreneurs. The culmination of her work has brought her to innovate the 3HQ framework, where she empowers midlife women to experience joy and reimagine what's possible. Welcome, Hilary. I love your bio.
Well, you know what's interesting is that whole, there's a lot of relaunches in what you just read, right? Relaunch, but about 3 years ago, before the pandemic, I would talk about relaunches and people would say, okay, so help me understand what you do. And then everything happened and it became, instead of a new normal, a new different. And people decided, hey, I need a relaunch. I need to do something different in my professional and my personal life. And that's where we step in.
Oh, it's so timely. I think so many people, I mean, I even think of my circle, like the close people that I know. How many people have had what is essentially a relaunch, in especially this time frame of COVID, coming out of COVID? It's my philosophy is like COVID or not, it's so important, I think, for us to reinvent ourselves and to have a fresh start and to create something new in our lives. And I want to mention, just because between the time you and I first connected, you've published a book, right? Speaking of relaunches.
Speaking of relaunches, yes, and that actually came out of something that happened right before COVID hit. My mom had a terrible bout of cancer, moved in with us, and in basically a year had passed away. And I come from a family where the women live into their hundreds. I mean, crazy, crazy. So for us, our identity is very much attached to we're going to live to 105, 106, because that's just what we do. And all of a sudden, my mom is gone at age 78. And it was just like, what? And so I didn't have the luxury of going out and doing a trip around the world, an eat, pray, love trip, or a wild adventure and start to, hike around the world. I had to do a lot of internal soul searching. And part of that was around writing this book around relaunches. I've been coaching for over 20 years. So I have so many stories about significant relaunches in people's lives and my own that I thought, you know what? All right. I have quite a bit that people could really take, use, and have, amazing results because I had seen it happen over and over. And I thought, this is the time. I'm doing it. So yes, since we have talked at that point, it took me almost a year because there was a lot of stories that had to come to the surface. There were a lot of and interesting. I remember when I first started the journey of writing the book, I had almost 200 Post-its all over. And I just remember the stories. I'm like, oh my God, and that would be a great one. And people would love to, hear the story about, when I was, in New York and I met this guy at this Manhattan hotel and he was drinking a martini at 11 o'clock. And I got that intuitive hit that said, run like crazy as fast as you can out of there. And I tried to never work with him again, but circumstances led us down this path that brought us together. Clearly, there was a lesson there. But in the book, I actually take you through this story and the fact that he ended up in federal prison for 3 years, just so everyone knows. So my intuition was on fire. I just wasn't fully listening to it. So I get, into this path of how do you build up your intuition. And you mentioned 3HQ. There is an awesome way that you can incorporate this next generation of IQ, where that was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. How intelligent are you? That makes for a good leader. To EQ of the 90s, where it was emotional quotient, how, emotionally connected. And then now in today's new different, it's about 3HQ and what 3HQ really is and what it can do for people and your audiences. 3HQ stands for head, heart, higher self. And when you can get out of your head, you can actually get out of your head by a lot of neuroscience behind all of this. I geek out on that. But if you can get out of your own way, and you can lean into that heart center, and you all of a sudden have these working in alignment and, synchronicity, all or synchron times, then all of a sudden you've got this ability to tap into your higher self. And these days, when we're given a lot more time to be present with ourselves, good, the bad, and the ugly, it really helps you understand that the higher self is just the best version of you. And so this is where it all comes to that point where is the breakdown within yourself?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm really sorry for your experience in the loss of your mom, right? That's a hard way to experience any kind of a transition or relaunch or anything else. But yeah, those losses are, especially, our parents, super, super meaningful and transitional and challenging to work through. How many relaunches, the way that you view that, how many would you say you've been through in your life, whether business, personal, right? I want to hear kind of some of the juicy background around this concept of relaunch.
So it's funny you should ask, because I really had never counted until about 3 months ago, when somebody asked me, because they thought, well, this is such an unusual. And I looked up pivots, I looked up transitions, I looked at setbacks, and I wanted to know, how many do most people have? And I even put this in the book that, they say on average, people have 3 to 4 major relaunches, major setbacks. And I started to count mine, and I got to 28. And I started to think, okay, I need to stop, because there's just so many. I was starting to feel like I'm like the queen of relaunch. From, you go back, and the way I have people do it is that I have them start with the decade they're in. And you put down the impactful situations that have happened, and there's divorces, and there's loss in families, there's job changes, there's, personal, as you said. Right now, there are 3 very different types of relaunches that are happening in the world. There's the global relaunch, pandemic, there's the financial crisis, there's wars. Then you've got business relaunches, which is, you've got the hybrid, you've got trying to figure out, like, hey, am I really fulfilling my purpose? Do I really like what I'm doing? Am I really happy with what I'm doing, for X amount of hours? Is there really any difference between, a home office? Like, what is that? Like, all these different things in the work world. And then there's the personal, relaunches, and those are the relationships. Those are, the relationship you have with yourself, with others, your family, and all that. So when you start to look at that, you can really put down on a timeline this relaunch time frame where you go through each and every one of your decades. And I look at it like a nesting doll, where you kind of take off that first level of that outer shell, and you know how it makes that sometimes that really obnoxious sound, that like you're trying to turn it, and it's like, yikes. And it's because it's hard to get that first one off. It is. And so I always start with what's, for me to say, okay, Heather, I need you to go back to when you were, 0 to 10. And you'd be like, what? I can't even remember. But if you take it from where you are and kind of take it backwards. And then I always like to say, put a plus sign or a minus sign or color code. And then you really get a sense of where have you been in your life that's been that relaunch roller coaster, and what's really been the most impactful? What have been, like, looking at this, what's really been something that has shaped you? And you mentioned that I've had, I have a podcast and I have a radio show. And I too have probably interviewed now about 175 people on their relaunches on how to successfully get through. I mean, you talk about the toolbox I have now. I got it. That's, hence the fact that I had to write the book. But one of the things that either I asked during the show or after is, if you could go back to that significant relaunch and be able to change it, would you? And do you want to hear not one? We're talking terrible, like, abusive situations, deaths. We've had, loss of limbs, just massive, massive sadness and situations and relaunches. And not one has ever said, you know what, Hilary, I'd go back and change it. Because where you come out, transition to transformation, is what we take. It's how we grow. It's what's next for us. I call it the G zone. And for a lot of people, it is your genius zone, but it's more importantly your growth zone. It's your gratitude zone. It's your greatness zone. And some of us have such like there's no fire in the belly anymore. We're just like, we're numb. We have this numb sense of just like, we're going through life. We're not living life. We're just like,
Right.
we're writing. We're
Surviving
writing that.
versus thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so when I look at my own experiences and I say, hey, I've gotten through, now I probably could add a couple more with my dad's passing that just happened 6 weeks ago, and another one. I probably am at 30 plus, okay? But without 3HQ, without me having some type of method that I keep relying on, there's a couch behind me. I'd probably be flat out on that couch. You'd be interviewing me from there because I wouldn't be able to even get my head off the pillow. So the good news is that there is something that even through the toughest of times, there are ways to have the transitions turn into transformations that are positive. And this is the misnomer. Transformation, sometimes people are like, well, aren't they always positive? And you transform. Heck no. I mean, as a coach, who's coached probably over 1,000 people, I got to tell you, no, there are a lot of transformations that you don't take it through the right process, and it keeps bringing you back, right? Until you learn something, until it's like you can't just hear it. You have to also listen to what it's telling you. And that's the key. Until you do that, life will repeat. And that's a really scary thing to say, but it goes back to even, the thoughts that you have. When you have them on autopilot, when you have them and you don't break away from being in your head and you allow them to take over, then how can you expect any different results?
Oh, so powerful. In discussing relaunches, and I think you provided a great list of examples and all the ways that relaunch can happen in our lives, right? Business, I mean, on a global scale, personally, etc. I'm sure you've learned because, ultimately, to the extent that we're still alive, right? We make it through those processes. We make it through that. And often, I think, really painful processes, right? Because we're
Yeah.
designed to grow through those experiences. We're designed to, if we pay attention and we approach it the right way, learn some things. Are there some tips that you can share with people that will help those processes go smoother, better, faster to the extent that they can, right? Because I know the feeling, and I know so many have felt like, right, I've been in the trenches, I'm doing the work, like I really am ready to be on the other side of this, right? What are your tips?
That, yeah, that is probably the number one question I get when I start to talk to someone who feels like they haven't gotten to where they thought they'd be, right? I thought I would be
Mm,
further along in my career. I thought I would have made more money by now. I thought I would be married by now to this person or in a happier relationship. I never dreamed I'd be living here. All of those things. And there has to be a point where we say, okay, the past is absolutely not going to get you ahead into the future. It's not. The past isn't. It's what you do with all of the things that you have learned and how you set yourself up. You made a comment about, rediscovering and reimagining and really taking a hard look at it. I deal a lot with people in their, I call it the mid zone, midlife,
mm,
right? And these days, midlife is anywhere from 35 to 60. Crazy, crazy, crazy. But that's where it's being defined. And this truly is such a critical time where we might be in that sandwich generation where we've got kids, we've got parents, we're trying to figure out who we are, we're trying to understand like what is next. And we fall into complacency. We fall into that period of being stuck, of feeling like, all right, I'm kind of just at the point where it is what it is.
mm,
So one thing that my mom always said when I was growing up, she didn't say it is what it is. She always says, it is what it is, Hilary. So now what? So now what? And that one line allows you to not be stuck anymore because so now what means you have to be thinking about that next step. So we do have a process, a very simple process that I like to do when it has to do with just trying to get out of your head. We
yeah.
have something called, every single one of us has limiting beliefs. And in my exhaustive experience, I've only met one person who said, I don't have any limiting beliefs. And I said, well, God love you, girl. That is incredible. And she, is a top level C-suite Fortune, probably 50 company. And she said, no, I don't have that. And I said, okay, let's take a step back. I'm willing to go there. Well, okay, you don't have them, but every single person that you come in contact does. We all have limiting beliefs. We all have stories that are on, the repeat and release. Boom, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And until we get to those, you can't get ahead of where your limiting beliefs will keep you. Your
Mm,
identity is mapped to your belief system. So wherever that is. So I call them bugs, your beliefs underground surfacing, your
mm,
bugs.
mm,
Again, we all have bugs. And yes, the three cornerstones of the three biggest bugs that everything always ties back to are I'm not good enough, no, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm not that, I haven't been able to do that. It's I'm not loved, I can't be loved,
mm,
I'm not lovable, and I'm not safe. And right now, in today's world, you look at it, and for a lot of people, the uncertainty falls in safe. So I'm uncertain about my health, I'm uncertain about my family, and I'm certain about the economy, and I'm certain about, if I'm going to get sick, all these different things. And then you've got this, am I good enough, which falls into the relaunches that are happening on a personal level and professional. And next thing you know, it's kind of like, oh geez, we might be all screwed, right? We might be all doomed by this one. But here's the thing. when you can start to realize, and through the day it comes in this awareness, when you start to be aware of when things aren't going for you the way you thought they would, there is this fear. The fear is something in the future that hasn't happened. Fear is in the future that hasn't happened, but the fear is tied to your limiting belief. And so imagine if we can get to your bug and we can belief blast it. So blast the bug at the in the brain at this neuro level, and it's synaptic pruning, where we actually take that limiting belief and we can see it under a microscope where it actually breaks apart and a new empowering belief is put in place. How does that change your life? How does that allow you to start to expand in your professional life, your personal life, not just with loved ones, but the personal life within yourself? And so I really think it's important to think about the belief blasters. And if I could just very quickly go through the 5 steps, because then people listening can be like, oh, hey, I can do that. And by the way, this is all in the book. It's detailed out, because my attitude is, you don't need to come to me. I can give you the steps. It's great to have you come to me is when you want to take it even further, right?
Well,
But
and
let me
I
give you this.
love that you gave people the signpost, though, to pay attention to their worries and their fears, right? And look backwards, because they're attached to some limiting, because I think a lot of people think, or they might be aware that they have some limiting beliefs, but they can't get to the specifics of what they are, right? It really does remain underground. And so, I'd also
And then
love
it
to
comes
hear.
up. It comes up at the most inopportune time, right? You're like, everything's great at work. I've had this awesome quarter. And then it falls to pieces. Why? It's because one of those gosh darn bugs is coming up. It's surfacing, and it will always continue to surface.
Love that. Okay, put a pin in that and let's go through the belief blasters.
Okay, so the first thing that you have to do, as you just said, is a lot of times it's tough to put a finger on it. Which one? And my attitude is this: when you realize something isn't where you want it to be, notice what's coming up for you for a day, for a week. What is starting to trigger for you? Like, are you feeling like every time that person comes in the room, you're like, I don't want to say anything? That's the I'm not good enough. Do you feel like time is slipping by so fast and you're running out of time? I'm like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, because, right? It's not going to happen. Do you feel like, oh, they're not going to like me, or I'm not going to be like the imposter syndrome? That's that whole, I'm not in a position to be loved and liked. And oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then you've got the safe, which is, am I going to be able to pay my bills? Am I going to be able to provide, for my family? One of the biggest fears women have, and even if you can believe this, Oprah Winfrey has this fear, is becoming a bag lady. That all of a sudden we go from, okay, I'm making money now, but will I keep making money? Or I'm not making any money right now. How am I going to get to a place where, am I ever going to be able to retire? Am I going to be able to be self-sufficient? So I want you to just be thinking, when I mention those, which one really caused you to be like, oh my gosh, I'm too old. This is like happening to me, or I'm too young. I don't have enough experience. What is it? And once you don't have to go all the way down to one of those root ones. You can just pick a high level bug that you're thinking right now. And a lot of times when you just start taking that highest level one through, it will end up leading you to the bigger, the deeper. But sometimes we're not ready to go there. Sometimes it's just too much. It's too much of when you start to look at the first one is releasing, and you are realizing, you start to realize that you have this bug. And then you start to realize the second step is this awareness. All right, I'm aware. Oh my gosh, Hilary was right. Look at, now that I am realizing I have it, how often it's coming up for me. Oh my gosh. Or when things aren't working right, there it is again. And then as you go through, so the first one is, realizing, then you've got the awareness, then you go ahead and we put you through a releasing process. At some point, we have to start realizing that if you continue to believe and live by and have that story running, that you won't ever get ahead. I mentioned that you can't get ahead of your belief system. So we got to break the belief system. So once you're able to do that, and we go through a releasing process with release letters, with a bunch of, neuroscience also. I think that there's so much data that's come out of the last 10 years. And I've been studying it for about 10 years, and psychology degree and all this. I've loved it forever. But then I do something in step 4, which is called the relaunch flip. And this is something that I can share very quickly. You have a thought. You have something that you just notice, it just keeps coming up, that negative thought. A relaunch flip takes that negative thought and forces you to make it into a positive one. Forces you to relaunch flip it, relaunch flip it. And that is something that it's like a muscle. You have to be building it. And a lot of times people say, change your thoughts, change your world, right? But here's the thing. A lot of times we have that thought and we don't know what to do with it. All right, it's there. It's there. Oh my gosh, I don't want to think about that. I'm not going to think about that. And you keep thinking about it. Instead, I like to say, all right, you got the thought. You got the thought. But what would be the opposite? So I'm not good enough. Like, I can't do that. I can't go for that promotion. I can't go for that job. I don't have the experience. And instead, what you would say is, you know what? I have all of the experience through all of the different jobs inside of me. I know I can do this. And then another one would be, I am capable of learning anything I set my mind at. I can learn what I don't know, right? So all of a sudden you're doing a relaunch flip. And the last part of the beliefs blaster is retrain your brain. And we've all heard of affirmations. We get them, but there's something very powerful when you think about something like a program running. Okay, you've got this program running behind. Instead of looking at it like, ugh, I got this thing. Instead, it's like, can we look at it like, I've got a project that I'm working on, and the project is Project Me. And whether it is the last half of the year, whether it's 2023, where you're like, I'm putting a stand out there and this is the year of me. We at some point have to take back ourselves. We have to take back ownership. Too many people are on the pedestal right now, and the top gurus are saying, love yourself, love your life, love your business, love, love, love. And when I was really trying to get to the love, I thought I was going to throw up in my mouth when I heard this, because I'm like, I don't even like myself right now. How am I going to go from this, self-sabotage to loving myself? It's like crossing the chasm. It's like jumping over, the Grand Canyon. You can't do it. So I always just say, give grace to yourself. And you talk about grit, which one of my favorite words of all time. And let's just start with going from self-sabotage, or I really hate myself, I really don't like myself, to I like myself. I like myself. And that's it. That's all we need to do right now. And once you start down that path, the affirmation of, I like myself, and pick that one thing. Like, okay, it might be that you have a nice smile, or you might be like, okay, I like my eyes, or you know what, I like my nails, whatever it is. I've had someone say, I can't think of any. And I'm like, all right, you got great nails. She's like, I really do. I got good nails. So start somewhere. And then once you do that, it's like you're building up that muscle to go to to go to love. And that's all part of that retraining your brain.
What this brings to mind for me, because I relate so strongly to, you were hinting at the piece where we all know we have this machinery running, right? And oftentimes, because we are, a mammal with an amygdala, right? It does not always serve us. And there's a lot of thoughts that are on repeat that sometimes we're aware of, sometimes we're not. If we start to pay attention and do some of the work that you reference, we can fix. But I love the reframe around, because I heard somebody say it in this way, like, you have a supercomputer in your body that will help you create whatever you want. Like think of it as a supercomputer that just needs some reprogramming, right? And it sounds like,
Love that.
yeah, your
It's
book and your method helps with that reprogramming.
absolutely, and again, it starts with your favorite neural language is your own voice. And whatever you think or speak, it's one and the same to your
Mm,
subconscious. It really doesn't matter. So when you start to think about, well, I got this problem. Well, is problem a negative or a positive? It's a negative, and we're trying to change everything about what we are putting out there into the future. So I often say, can we change that word problem? Because if we already are starting with something like, I got this problem, I got this thing, I should have done, I could have done, all of that in the past, this is part of the release that I do talk about.
mm,
If we can change the way we look at that instead, it's not a problem. Like I got this thing at work and I'm trying to deal with, and it's this real problem. Is it a problem, or is there a goal around it that you're
mm,
trying to get to? Is it a project that you're trying to complete? Is there
mm.
an outcome? Is there a different way to do a relaunch flip on that?
It's huge. I think,
It's huge. It
yeah,
really
it
is.
it is huge. Those all those small thoughts that we have because we have this supercomputer, right? Those small thoughts, but I heard somebody else say it this way. When you have a thought that makes you feel bad, right? Just like the simple label good or bad, like when something makes you feel positive or hopeful, and when something makes you feel like oof, just notice those, right? Notice those and do this work around those. Can be totally simple thoughts like that, changing one word, problem to a project. I love it because people want to know where to start. I think people really want to be able to do this work the right way. And it feels a little daunting sometimes working with these supercomputers
It
that,
it does. And we
that
all
some,
talk about like, okay, well, a supercomputer, you can just hit the, off button and, turn it on again and it'll be rebooted. And you're like, crap, I just rebooted this thing and I still feel like, I'm stuck. I still feel like I'm, numb. I still feel like I don't have fire in my belly. And then that's when they're like, okay, what can I do? And again,
yeah.
like you just said, it's it really is incredible what a few minor tweaks can actually do. And then when you do that and you start down the path, and it starts with you, literally saying, I, I'm not willing to accept. I'm not willing to accept this. And the what if? What if my second half of life, my next chapter, the next part of this story that's being written is actually really incredible. I mean, imagine that. That's where we have to go. That's where we have to. And the greatest part is the universe is not going to sit there and say, all right, Heather, you are going to be a multi-millionaire. You're going to have the greatest kids. They're never going to cause you any problems. And you're going to have this amazing husband. But Hilary, not you. No, it's all based around, I often am asked like this whole money story and, why are, how do people get to be really wealthy? And, and a lot of times I talk about my own experience of going from college where I had not even, I had no money graduating from college. My parents were awesome until I graduated and they're like, okay, bye-bye, you're good. And I
Go
had to build
fly.
it. Yeah, yeah, go fly. I hope those wings are strong enough. And I had to really create that. And I had to look at it. And I think that this is what fascinated me with being in corporate world for 10 years and then being in my own companies and launching them and doing what I've been doing, that I had an opportunity to really understand that. I looked at it like, okay, what am I confused about here? And I was confused how some people who had a great deal of money were really nice, really wonderful people, very philanthropic. And then there were some that were just asses, just like awful. They were they were mean. They were not like
Mm,
how could they have money and they have money and
right. How could the
what's the
universe
deal?
want to flow money over here through that? Right.
Right.
Yes, I get
And
it.
then it all hit me after numerous, I mean, it just like, I guess, it's one of those, maybe there's a book, another book out there of, all the things I've learned over time, right? And what I realized is that the people who have money, who are nice, the people who have money, who are mean, have something in common. And that in common part is that they have this thought that they're going to be wealthy. They're going to make things out of whatever. So I'm not saying you can be mean and go down that path. And, all I have to do is think about being, having money. But there is something to be true about your way that you're showing up. And if you're constantly in that place of I'm stuck, it's
Mm,
blaming somebody else, I'm embarrassed where I am right now, then that's what you're going to continue to get. And when you can reframe and really look at that example about the money, and you start to
mm,
realize like you have that choice, and we are human beings, we are the only ones out there that really have the ability to change our thoughts, do a relaunch flip, allow us to realize that we have sad days, we have sad months, we have sad things that happen, but they don't have to define our entire future. It can be a time where I give myself, time to journal and time to mourn and time to say, God, I've been through a lot, both parents in the
mm.
last, couple years, unexpectedly. And now I sold a house of 25 years that I built with my first husband. I sold it. I remarried 9 years ago with this fabulous guy. He was nice during COVID and moved back into this house because we were living in a high rise. And we ended up selling that house and moving states, moving to Colorado from California. There's a lot of relaunches.
Yeah.
And I give myself the chance to say, I've been through a lot. I've been through a lot. But I also realize that I have a lot to get into with my life. I have a lot to come. And so it's not this defining of this is it, this is what's happened. Oh my gosh, woe is me. It's all right, I've learned a boatload. My gosh, I couldn't have written the book without all of these relaunches. I couldn't have, I didn't have the people coming to me saying, I laugh these days. I'm like, I'm not throwing this out, universe. I'm not putting it out there, but I really feel like I've tapped into a lot of relaunches that the majority of people come to me with. Like even,
Mm,
good grief, I've had melanoma. I mean, like, wow, goodness sakes, I've had a lot, but I still look at it like, but look at now how I can touch people, how I can help them, how I can shorten the path to relaunch. You mentioned that earlier, the time, like don't make me struggle to get through it. Help me understand how this is part of my toolbox and I can go through it easier and have that more powerful
yeah.
transformation.
I love your perspective that, you can experience some of this really hard stuff like you've gone through even in your, recent last few years, and how it's not this either or, like life is all hard or it's all rain, it's all, it's like life is very full. Like I experienced this hard stuff and look over here, right, where I can still do amazing work. I can still show up and serve people, whatever the reframe is. I think recognizing the fullness and keeping those hard things in perspective is really hard to do when you're in them, and also really paramount to being able to like move on and, move through them.
And that's where the relaunch flip comes in handy. It
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
And,
Folks, if you're
you know,
listening, I know, I feel like we have a round 2 of this discussion to be scheduled. The importance of this work, though, it just cannot be overstated. Even through some recent experiences, learning it really in a hands-on way, the importance of rewiring these neural connections that are causing us some problems, right? Even physical stuff. it is profound when you create a shift or can see a change and have it manifest even in a physical way in your body and your health. So I can't wait to pick up this book and read through it and learn about, your program and your steps. Hilary, it's been a joy to connect with you and hear a little bit about your story. For folks listening, where do you like to connect online?
So I think, and first off, I've enjoyed listening to other podcasts that you've done. And I think that, again, I said, the grit, and you put it out there. And I really enjoy how you serve your audience, because it's really impressive. And so thank you again for having me on. And the way that people can connect with me is you can actually go to the relaunchcode.com, and there is a section that will say book. That is a great way to start. There's also, I do a lot of free workshops that fall nicely in line with the book. And it works out really well so that you kind of read the book and then you can go into a free, or you go into the free workshop first, whatever suits you. But also you can check it out on Instagram. So you can go to the Relaunch Co there.
Oh, excellent. I love that. So for all of you that love pretty pictures, go over to Instagram.
Exactly.
If you're online,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. We'll share your link to the relaunchco.com. It sounds like you have some amazing resources. Folks, if you're listening, you can find those and anything else, Hilary, that you'd like to share with us, including, for example, a link to your new book, Relaunch. At the show notes page, which can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Hilary, so great to connect with you. I'm so happy that we get to help share your message with folks who need it, because we all need this, right? There's nobody, I'm sorry, even the women you talked to that said, I have no limiting beliefs. There, my belief is that we all need it.
Well, thank you. And it has been so much fun being on your show. Heather, keep doing what you're doing.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to being in touch, Hilary. Thank you.